So let's look at the concept of homeostasis and go through and discuss its importance to survival. Homeostasis is the body's ability to maintain a constant internal environment despite external environmental changes. We already mentioned this in terms of body temperature. The 98.6 degrees that we mentioned, our body tries to maintain that temperature. Our body will sweat to cool down, or our body will shiver in the winter in order to warm up, in order to maintain that temperature. Another example is the normal range of glucose. So what this graph is showing here is the normal set point value of blood glucose at 90 milligrams per milliliter. You don't need to memorize that detail. But the idea of homeostasis is if we were to actually monitor the blood glucose level, as you can see here by the red line, over time it would increase and decrease and increase and so on, and it constantly changes over time. But our body causes changes we'll look at later in order to try to maintain that normal range of 90 milligrams per milliliter in that homeostatic range. How does it do that? It does it through a couple of different processes, but the major one here is the negative feedback. Negative feedback causes an opposite response to change in our body. It's made up of our body having receptors that react to a stimulus, a change in the internal environment, and then it sends information to the control center. Usually this is going to be our brain that has a set point that says, I want to maintain my temperature, let's say at 98.6 degrees, and the brain knows that you want to do that. The receptors send information that maybe you're too cool or too warm, and then your brain processes that information. It will then send information out to effectors, muscles or glands, saying, hey, we're too cold here, and so muscles shiver so that there is a response. I shiver and I produce heat and my body warms up and the change is ultimately corrected. My body originally got cold, so the temperature dropped, and then my response was to cause me to shiver to generate higher temperature. As we're saying here, negative feedback causes a change that is an opposite response to the initial change, the initial stimulus. Here's another diagram basically showing the same thing. Homeostasis is this teeter-totter at the bottom, this balance, and when things get imbalanced, there's some stimulus that produces change. Ultimately, we have some receptors or sensors that send information to the control center, to the brain, which processes that information. It relates it to what our body ought to be at, and then sends signals out along other nervous systems or hormone systems to cause a change that ultimately brings our body back into balance. So this might be very general information here, so let's look at an example of something outside the body that you might be used to. So let's look at a feedback loop where we're looking at a house that during the winter the temperature decreases. The house starts to become cooler, and that is detected by a sensor, a thermostat. The thermostat senses that drop in temperature, sends a signal to an integrator, a piece of machinery that ultimately has the set point value. You've set your house to maintain a 72 degree temperature, for example. It sends information to that, and then, since the temperature is dropping, the integrator will send information to the effector, the furnace in this place, that turns on and generates heat, ultimately causing an increase in temperature in the house. Let's compare that then to the human body. So this looks like a lot of information all at once here, but if we go through the same process, we could say, what if I'm outside on a winter day and my temperature begins to decrease? That's detected by receptors in my skin. Those receptors send nerve impulses to my brain, which ultimately is going to compare the temperature that my skin is at to the set point value of the 37 degrees Celsius or the 98.6 Fahrenheit that we saw earlier on. Because it's noting that the temperature is dropping, it will send signals out to the effector, out to the muscles to cause shivering, which ultimately will help to increase my temperature. Basically, it is analogous to this process that went on in the house example that we saw earlier. We also looked at the homeostasis of blood glucose, and so this is another example where we could say, okay, the normal range of blood glucose needs to be around the 90 milligrams per milliliter, and so our body reacts in order to maintain that value. As my blood glucose value starts to increase, maybe I've had breakfast recently, and so I've eaten a bunch of food, it's being digested, and sugar is being absorbed into my body, and my blood glucose levels are increasing. As my blood glucose levels increase, what will happen is my pancreas will release insulin in order to drop my blood glucose levels. It will tell my muscles and my liver to store the glucose for use later. And so we can see there's a decrease in the amount of glucose found in the blood. Maybe during the middle of the day, I haven't eaten lunch yet, my blood glucose levels are dropped a little bit, but I have an important class that I need to go to and I can't eat in class. And so what happens is my pancreas will actually release a different hormone, glucagon in this case, and it will cause the release of the glucose from my muscles and liver in order to go into my blood, increasing my blood glucose levels. That way the sugar gets around my body, will go into other tissues, and along with oxygen, as we showed earlier, will provide the energy that my tissues need. The opposite of negative feedback is positive feedback. Not many of the body's processes uses this feedback mechanism, but this is a feedback mechanism that ultimately amplifies an effect of something that is already going on in the body. The best example that I can point to is birthing. And so here we have this variable of the baby has filled the uterus and it is starting to press down on the birth canal. And so there is stretching going on in the lower portion of the uterus. So what happens is it is sensed via these stretch receptors near the baby's head in the uterus itself. And then those sensors send information to the integrator, to the brain. Then the brain, instead of causing the baby to stop pressing on the uterus by maybe relaxing the uterus, it actually causes the uterus to contract even more. If the uterus contracts even more, there is even more stretch pushing down on the lower portion of the uterus. So the stretch receptors sense even more stretch. And so they send that information to the brain. And then the brain causes even more uterus muscle contraction. And so the process continues until the baby is actually birthed. And it's only at that point that the uterus will stop contracting. Okay, describe the levels of organization within the human body. I realize this image is a lot of information at once, but I wanted to give you the idea of the small microscopic levels all the way up through the gross or large levels of the organism. Starting down in microscopic levels, we start with atoms. The chemical level, the actual atoms that make up the chemicals that ultimately make up our body. And so atoms are the individual chemical structure, the atoms that make up then the next level up, which are molecules. So the glucose, the individual amino acids, and various other chemicals that ultimately help make up our body. As we move up, we produce macromolecules, actual protein filaments, or large strands of glucose called glycogen for stored energy, and so on. And these are very large molecules. And then we eventually get to the organelle level. These are actually functional parts that we find within the cell. And then all those organelles together collectively make up the cell. So in the example here, we see the heart muscle cell, which inside you can see some of the organelles there. We'll look at more organelles later on, but we want to get an idea of, again, the increasing size here. So now we're at the cell level. If we take many cells that ultimately all have the same function and put them together, we're dealing with a tissue. So here we're looking originally at cells, heart muscle cells, but heart muscle tissue is many heart muscle cells together causing a function. So the contraction of the heart muscle in this case. Then we move up to the organ. The organ is the heart itself. It is made up of many different tissues. The muscle tissue, the fat tissue, the nervous tissue, and so on, that ultimately goes into the organ, the overall heart. Then we get to the organ system level. We can see all the different organ systems listed here. We're going to look a little closer at those in just a second. All those organ systems together ultimately make up us, the organism level, the individual. And so here we've gone, again, from the microscopic levels all the way up through the gross levels of organization within the human body. So let's take a closer look at the 11 body systems and give general functions of each. The integumentary system consists of the skin and related structures such as hair and nails. The integumentary system forms a covering for the body, helps regulate body temperature, and contains some of the structures necessary for sensation. The skeletal system forms the basic framework of the body. It consists primarily of bones, joints, and cartilage. The skeleton protects and supports the body organs and enables us to move around. The muscular system has 3 types of muscles. Skeletal muscles attach to bones and are responsible for movement of the skeleton and maintenance of body posture. And smooth and cardiac muscles are found in various organs and tubes, and contraction and relaxation of these muscles help the organ systems carry out their functions. The nervous system is made up of the brain, spinal cord, nerves, and sense organs. Sensory nerves receive information from the environment and bring it to the spinal cord and brain, where it's interpreted. Decisions made by the brain and spinal cord are transmitted along motor nerves to various body structures. The endocrine system contains numerous glands that secrete hormones and chemical substances that regulate body activities such as growth, reproduction, metabolism, and water balance. The circulatory system actually breaks down into 2 systems. The first is the cardiovascular system. This consists of the blood, heart, and blood vessels. This system pumps and transports blood through the body. Blood carries nutrients and oxygen to all body cells and also carries waste away from the cells to the organs of excretion. The lymphatic system is made up of lymph nodes, lymphatic vessels, lymph, and other lymphoid organs. Lymph and lymphoid structures play an important role in fluid balance and in the defense of the body against pathogens and other foreign material. The digestive system is comprised of organs designed to ingest food and break it down into substances that can be absorbed by the body. Food that is not absorbed is eliminated as waste. The respiratory system contains the lungs and other structures that conduct air to and from the lungs. Oxygen-rich air moves into the lungs. The oxygen is picked up by the blood and then distributed throughout the body. Carbon dioxide-rich air moves out of the lungs, thereby ridding the body of this waste. The urinary system contains the kidneys and other structures that help secrete waste products from the body through urine. More importantly, the urinary system helps control water, electrolyte, and acid-base balance in the body. The reproductive system is made up of organs and structures that enable humans to reproduce.